Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 11th of December. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information right here on Alaska Weather or from the National Weather Service. There's lots of different ways to get that information. The Alaska Weather Information Line is one of those ways. 1-800-472-0391 is an easy and free phone call anywhere around Alaska that connects you to your National Weather Service forecast 24 hours a day. Online access is easy at weather.gov/Alaska. One click on the map will get you to your local weather forecast office. One more click gets you to your hyperlocal forecast at any point around Alaska or Alaska's waters. Make sure you bookmark the sites that you need and get to them a lot faster. Of course, mobile.weather.gov is an easy way to find that on your mobile device, and so we encourage you to use that, type in your location, and then save that screen to your home page on your phone, on your mobile device, on your tablet, and it'll use a lot less bandwidth and load a lot faster. You can even do that on your personal computer. It will look a little different than what it'll look like on your phone. It is designed to work like an app, but it isn't an app. It's just a web page, but it's a lot lighter and moves a lot faster out in the bush. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is how you find me. I hope you find what you need, but if you don't, please let me know. It is my privilege to serve you any way I possibly can. Here's a look at the hazardous weather map for Alaska, and again, not a whole lot going on as far as really big, rough, and tough weather goes, but in Haines, starting tomorrow afternoon for Thursday and going into Friday, we're expecting a winter weather advisory. It does look like snow is going to fall there again, as much as 4 to 8 inches of snow for Haines and the Haines Highway. That'll start around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and continue into the evening and overnight hours onward into Friday, so plan on accumulating snow in Haines. And a little bit of a southerly wind should help to do that as moisture is moving up through southeastern Alaska as we go. And we're moving toward that process right now. As we head to the satellite picture here, you can see that broad area of low pressure sitting out across the Gulf, well south of Kodiak Island, pushing a lot of moisture out across the western part of Alaska. But for southeast, moisture is still working its way up the coast and continues with another little surge of warmer and wetter air that's going to work its way up through the Lynn Canal as we head into tomorrow afternoon. And of course, as that is moving up the hill and up the valley, that should cool off even more and allow some snow to fall there. That's what the thinking is this afternoon. So a winter weather advisory tomorrow afternoon for Haines and the Haines Highway with as much as 8 inches of snow. Now, that's really not the case for most of the interior today. In fact, we're seeing very dry conditions across many locations. A little bit of a breeze from time to time. In fact, temperatures really aren't all that wintry at the moment. For Yukon this afternoon is only hovering right around 0, maybe just a tad below. Temps in the 20s around the middle Tanana Valley, including Fairbanks. And even up north, with a gale out across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, it still wasn't quite as bad as you might think for late December. There were some pockets of snow around the North Slope and Point Barrow and just south toward Utqiagvik. And areas around the Chukchi coast, we're seeing some pockets of snow. A little bit of snow here across parts of southwest down toward the Alaska Peninsula. A better chance for some blowing snow across the peninsula later tonight, but not as bad to warrant any weather alert or advisory as we go ahead into the evening and overnight hours. So one more look at the satellite picture. You can also see the general trend of that southeast to northwesterly flow, and all of that is brought to us by the jet stream, carving out a broad area of low pressure that's slowly going to open up and allow a little more cold air, it looks like, to work into parts of the northern Bering as we go. Here's a look at the surface chart right now, and low pressure is sitting there at 961 millibars. It's pushing a front away from that center of low pressure, moving out toward the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and Shelikof Strait, and parts of the outer coast. Low sitting right outside of the Dixon entrance, right around 989 millibars. And just to the south and east of that is where we have another surge of warmer and wetter air that's trying to move northward. That'll be in place over Haines and the capital city as we get into tomorrow afternoon. A couple waves of low pressure out beyond that, one of those making its way across the Alaska range right now, and that's initiating a few more clouds well off to the north. Some light snow there across parts of southwest and still fairly unsettled out even further west into the Bering. Low pressure there, not terribly strong, got a few snow showers passing through Atka, it looks like this afternoon, but other than that, some passing fair weather clouds. Tonight's forecast shows that low pressure really won't move very much over the Gulf of Alaska, and really this should be the case for the next couple days as well. Pockets of rain moving through, some high terrain snow is possible, but it doesn't look like we'll see anything too substantial around Haines until maybe tomorrow afternoon. Watch for periods of rain and snow across parts of Southwest, and in fact, as you look at the aviation charts in just a minute, I encourage you to look at the areas for overrunning. Remember, we talk about that warm and wet air coming up over that layer of surface cold air. And if that happens, that can set up an opportunity for some freezing rain. We'll be watching for some of that as we get out in parts of Southwest. Right now, no big signal for that. But one thing that we are going to watch for is some areas of blowing snow around the Alaska Peninsula. Probably not a whole lot of rain. Temperatures will be right there on the edge, and especially tomorrow again. So watch for the wind to move some of that around. Out over the Gulf, it's all warm and wet air, so no big risk there for any major system there. 973 millibars will get the wind going, and there may be some gales, but nothing too terribly strong right now. It does look like there's going to be snow again returning to the Haines area. Once again, a winter weather advisory tomorrow afternoon into the evening for about 4 to 8 inches of snow. The high up across the Northwest Territories and the Yukon keeps the wind moving across the region, but right now it's really not setting up much of a big wind event yet for southeast or the Copper River Basin, so we'll keep watch on that. We need the low to move just a little bit further south to get that into more of a prime position, I think, at this point. We're watching for some areas of blowing snow up across the Beaufort Seacoast. Again, we have gales there tonight. Out across the west, fairly mild conditions still holding on to the west. That could change a little bit as we get more of this cold air moving to the west. A new weather system approaches the western Aleutians as we get into Thursday and Friday. It looks like it's going to run just to the south. With that, we get into a little bit more of a southerly draw coming across the eastern Aleutians, and that could push some snow up into the Pribilofs, but keep things fairly mild across the chain and reinforce that warm and wet air coming in from lower latitudes into the Gulf of Alaska. That shall keep the rain moving in southeast, Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, and keep an opportunity for some light snow and a little bit of a breeze across the west coast, while most of the interior and most of the North Slope stays pretty dry. Here's a look at temperatures as we get into the morning hours tomorrow. Well, could be as cold as 10 below around Fort Yukon, single digits for Fairbanks. That's still not that cold for this time of the year, of course. Upper 20s and lower 30s for South Central and the Kenai Peninsula, 43 in Kodiak, 30s and 40s for Southeast. Sitka looking at 41, Capital City about 36, and mid to upper 30s for southern parts of the Panhandle. Alaska Peninsula temperatures including Sand Point in the mid to upper 30s. Bethel looking at about 15, 1 in Galena, and 8 for Utqiagvik. As we get into tomorrow afternoon, not a big temperature change to Fort Yukon. No surprise there. Teens and low 20s around the Fairbanks region, down toward Denali at 24. McGrath looking at 12. Ambler 22. Point Hope and Point Lay looking at temps in the teens and 20s. Kotzebue 24. Eagle only 12. Friday morning, well, again, not a big cool off at all in the interior. Only 14 below in Fort Yukon, 9 below for Arctic Village. Single digits for the North Slope, Southwest and Bristol Bay, King Salmon and Dillingham in the 20s. 30s for Southeast, South Central in the 20s and 30s, and high temperatures on Friday, a little bit cooler for some, still holding in the mid-30s for South Central.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on we go with your aviation weather now. IFR concerns will wrap around low pressure that's going to hover here in the Gulf of Alaska for at least the next day or so. We'll have the front banked up against the Gulf all the way wrapping into southeast, and that's going to keep a lot of the wind working across the north and the eastern side of the storm and really slop a lot of that low weather out here across the west coast, Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, and kind of right up against into the Kenai Fjords, with some of that certainly making its way into southeast as well. We'll start out tomorrow morning with marginal conditions all the way around the Gulf and for a few places offshore for sure, but certainly into the Kenai Fjords, Barren Islands, Kodiak Island, up through Bristol Bay and up towards St. Lawrence Island. We're going to see IFR conditions to start. Also watching for IFR across Utqiagvik, Point Barrow, inland toward the North Slope, and then north and west out into the Chukchi Coast, with VFR likely for many parts of the interior. But as we get into the afternoon, we'll start to see more of that marginal weather starting to creep in a little bit more up the Kuskokwim, through the Copper River Valley, along the Alaska Range, the Susitna Valley, all the way down Cook Inlet, past Kenai, and almost to Homer. Probably looking at VFR, but everywhere else on the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and certainly in southeast, we're looking at least marginal weather with IFR across some of the higher terrain around Tanita Pass and east. Of course, across the Gulf, we'll continue that area of IFR. That pulls away a little bit from parts of the west coast, north of the Yukon Delta, but into the Bering Strait we go, and IFR conditions are expected there. We will see some breaks across the Pribilovs, and certainly the Bering Sea as we get into Thursday afternoon. And that thins out even more. It may even last to Friday morning. You can see, though, that will change with the next wave working its way in from the west. IFR stretches from St. Lawrence Island down through southwest, Kodiak Island, and into the central and northern Gulf. Marginal weather concerns continue for southeast, most of south central. Once again, some holes around Clam Gulch all the way north through Kenai, Soldotna, and probably up through the Susitna Valley, maybe including Palmer as well. IFR lingers around the Chukchi coast, but the Beaufort Seacoast looks pretty good at this point, and that should continue through Friday afternoon with VFR stretching all the way through the central and some parts of the western interior, certainly the Alcan border, and into southeast. We're still looking at marginal weather there with IFR across parts of south central, Kodiak Island, and again, the majority of the villages there inside of Bristol Bay. Here's your pass conditions for Thursday. Once again, up north looks pretty good, at least for a little while. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, VFR conditions expected there tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass holding at marginal levels as we go through the day. Rainy Pass leans over toward marginal weather as we get into Thursday. Windy Pass starts at VFR as well, ends at MVFR, and Isabel Pass likely heading in the same direction. Tanea Pass expected to be marginal through most of your Thursday, and Portage Pass probably pushes over toward marginal weather just like so many others, and Chilkoot and White Pass will likely hold at marginal weather at least Thursday and probably onward into Friday as well. We were looking at this yesterday and noticed some warming up across the north slope. The reason being is the upper level wind pattern. You'll see the jet stream here in just a minute. High pressure sitting right here and just to the north and east. And that has grabbed a substantial amount of warm air and is rotating that around, and then has brought that warmth up into the north slope. So freezing levels there stretch from 2,000 feet closer to some southern locations in the north, and as high as 6,000 feet just east of Point Barrow and north of Prudhoe Bay, and even including Dead Horse, it looks like. Now that warm layer also extends across the Gulf, and that's a little bit more typical, and across the Yukon Delta and into the middle Yukon Valley itself. 2 to 4, even 6,000 foot levels are expected with the surface freezing line just north of St. Matthew and just south of St. Lawrence Island. Icing potential is certainly there, above 2,000 feet across some of the western areas here for isolated moderate risk, above 5,000 feet across parts of south central, all the way up to about the Alaska Range. And then as you head out to southeast, levels there extend maybe up to 6,000 feet and higher. So again, a lot of this is a little bit higher than most places can probably need to deal with. As we take a look out to the west, you'll notice we've got a couple ripples in the jet stream. The main corridor of fast-moving air is still well south of the Aleutians, but we have these ripples that keep passing just to the south of the mainland. High pressure is a big player right now across the Beaufort Seacoast, so wind speeds coming in from the east and off of western Canada, where it is oh so cold, coming in from the east about 70 knots right now. Low pressure in the Gulf also playing a role at 9,000 feet with a broad southwesterly flow coming into southeast. Easterlies moving across the mainland there, anywhere from 20 to 40 knots, and low pressure extends all the way out across the Bering. That elongated trough is a player that's grabbing a lot of that moisture and moving its way from southeast to northwest, as we talked about yesterday. Wind speeds across the interior at this level, and the Alaska Range around 40 knots with low pressure really turning things up across the central and western Gulf. Wind speeds across the Gulf and into southeast coming in around 15 to 35 knots, and westerlies across the southern Bering. Turbulence in, certainly considerable moderate across the Brooks Range and just south, and maybe a chance for isolated severe across the southern Kenai Peninsula, generally below 6,000 feet.
When you think of a national park, you probably envision wide open natural spaces, undisturbed by human activity. There are indeed such places, but even in some of the most remote areas of a place like Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska, the mark of man is present. Marine debris is a menace to the farthest reaches of our globe, and even designated national park lands are not immune. In the summer of 2009, the Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance, a grassroots conservation organization based in Seward, Alaska, decided to do something about the marine debris fouling the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park. Marine debris coordinator Tim Johnson had first-hand experience with the issue.
The summer before, my wife and I, Michelle, had done a paddle from Seward, sea kayak paddle from Seward to Homer. Really, our eyes were open to some areas that we didn't realize there was so much accumulation. It was very deceiving up front. You couldn't really get a feel for the extent and impact of it. You've got this nice high tide line that's quite pristine, and you really don't get a picture for the impact and the amount of debris in that area until you get behind those storm berms. You get back into the lagoons and the vegetation around those lagoons. And then you see the absolute extent back into that veg and how intertwined and enmeshed these decades of trash deposition. So we were just appalled by that and said we got to get something together on a larger scale.
The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance is a local nonprofit community organization, and they have been instrumental in helping the Park Service obtain funding to get larger boats to help move the debris, and they get volunteer labor and organize the work trips. And so it's really a partnership between the Park Service and the community to help get out and really get a project done that in and of itself any one group couldn't do on their own.
Most of that trash was baggable. However, there were large items, huge, piles of hauser line, for example, that we just had to hoist up onto the boat.
The volunteers didn't just bag, haul, and hoist the garbage, but also carefully recorded what types of debris were collected.
In many ways, the debris itself is a resource. Archaeologists use middens, the trash heaps, as a way of analyzing past cultures, and in one sense, marine debris is a form of a midden. It's a trash heap that left for the future would be something that people could use to analyze our culture. It may not say the best things about our culture or everything that we want, but we need to be able to document what we've done so that we can preserve that legacy, make sure that we as a society don't forget what we've been doing.
We had two larger categories of marine debris that we picked up. Commercial fishing means like, say, gill nets, large hauser lines, anything that would be associated with more of a commercial fishing scale. And then the second category was more recreational fishing and household, which would be general plastics, things like that. So we had about a 75% of the commercial fishing marine debris element, and about 25% of the recreational and household further out the bay. And we had the exact opposite the closer we got to Seward. Within the bay, it was about 25% commercial fishing versus 75% recreational fishing and household.
The trash is not just unsightly for park visitors, but also poses threats to wildlife and marine habitat.
Really one of the larger issues now that you go to this plastic that can really get into the food web and affect the food web differently than something like glass.
These substances, for instance, all these polystyrene blocks that are breaking down into all these little crumbly bits are further breaking down on a microscopic level, and how much of an impact that has, in this ecosystem is yet to be determined, but I think it's got pretty high potential.
Well known that sea turtles will eat plastic bags floating in the water. They look like jellyfish to a sea turtle, and Obviously, a plastic bag doesn't go well in the digestive system of a turtle. Albatross will see small pieces of plastic floating on the surface and think they're small fish and other food sources and eat that in their stomachs, especially in some of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They'll find dead albatross that have starved to death with a full stomach, and it's full of pieces of plastic.
We're affecting our local areas this way, but we need to be thinking about it from more of a state and global, international scale. And most importantly, to try and focus on prevention of it coming in the first place. Because we're just going to see this continuing, to build up on our beaches unless we're able to get a little bit more of an approach on prevention on the front end.
Marine debris is really a global problem, in all the oceans, and there are many different sources. Global shipping is one. Fishing debris from commercial fishing, recreational boating activity on land, stuff blowing off land, washing down streams, people just throwing stuff on the shore.
Though the problem can seem overwhelming, Johnson remains upbeat about making a positive difference.
No, you gotta start locally. You gotta, take control of what you can do, and make something with that, and try and move on from there.
Overall, more than 9 tons of debris was removed from the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park and transported back to Seward to be deposited in a landfill.
People gave a lot to the project in order to make it happen. That was awesome. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. Being able to put that large of a group of volunteers together, dedicated volunteers to put that much effort and give that much time and pull all the different agencies together to see it all happen was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, very fulfilling experience.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your sea ice now. The Beaufort is generally pack ice full right now, but you'll see areas across the Chukchi still have some open water as just south of the shoals, and certainly a wide area of marginal ice. Some of that creeps its way into the northern parts of Kotzebue Sound and into the Bering Strait, and then down toward the west coast. We'll continue to see a lot of variation here across Southwest as we have some strong south and easterly winds blowing up over the southwestern coast, so changes continue there. But good news is there is more ice in the Chukchi than there was last week. As we look at southeast now for Thursday, a broad southeasterly flow will continue northerlies in the Lynn Canal tomorrow. It looks like there will be some possibility for snow to move into the region again around the Haines area and Haines Highway. As you look up the outer coast, a south and southeasterly wind, 25 to 30 with winds picking up a little bit, 19 to 20 foot seas, 21 foot seas in fact outside of the Dixon entrance. That comes down just a little bit as we head into Friday. Winds diminish in many areas, 20 to 25 knots sustained across the outer coast. Southeasterlies coming up through the inside passage, 15 to 20. And seas diminishing, 3 to 4 foot seas there. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 20 knots and 4 foot seas. A north and easterly flow wrapping around low pressure to your south. With a 35 knot wind, expect about 18 foot seas in the eastern Barrens. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet as well. 25 to 30 knots with 9 foot seas in the north and 12 foot seas in the south. Winds and seas diminishing as we get into Friday there, 20 to 30 knots. Most areas 7 to 10 foot seas in Cook Inlet. 25 knots with an easterly flow in Prince William Sound, 6 foot seas, and anywhere from 12 to 17 foot seas across the north and western Gulf. Again, low pressure pretty much in its same old spot across the western Gulf. For Thursday in Shelikof Strait, look for a northeasterly wind at 30 knots, 11 foot seas. They're more of a north and westerly flow crossing parts of the Alaska Peninsula, 15 to 30 in the Bering Sea coast, 30 to 40 across the Pacific, 5 foot seas inside of Bristol Bay. Again, some areas are looking at a little bit of coastal ice, nothing too significant that far south just yet. Northerlies continue in Shelikof Strait for Friday, 6 foot seas. Otherwise, a north and westerly flow pulling into low pressure sitting right about here, just east of Kodiak Island. The strongest winds and highest seas will be a little bit further off to your east. For Thursday, across the Aleutians, we're looking at 25 to 30 knot winds. Southeasterlies already building in across Kiska to Shemya as low pressure begins to move in from the west there. Otherwise, we're pulling air in from west to east across the Aleutians into the low pressure system out in the Gulf. 25 knots there with about 9 to 11 foot seas for the most part. By Friday, we see the results of that new system already starting to pull winds back into the region. You can see the front working its way across Adak and heading for Atka at this point on Friday afternoon. 40 knot winds there from Atka to Nikolsky. We're looking at about 10 to 11 foot seas. Out to the west, 13 to 18 foot seas, all looking at about 30 to 40 knot winds on Friday. For the west coast, ice is beginning to get closer to the shore and stick a little bit. Northeasterlies around Norton Sound for a northeasterly flow near Nome, about 20 knots. Easterlies working over St. Lawrence Island. Northeasterly winds around St. Matthew, and westerlies for St. Paul and St. George, 20 knots with an 8-foot sea. On Friday, look for generally light winds, 10 to 15 knots in most areas, 4-foot seas around the Bering Strait communities. Southeasterlies for the Pribilofs with a 6-foot sea on a 20-knot wind, and westerlies coming into the Kuskokwim Delta with a 5-foot sea. For the North Slope communities, a stronger wind here. Again, tonight we have gales out across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast and a brisk wind advisory north of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Look for easterlies coming in around 20 to 35 and a north and easterly wind moving down the Chukchi coast 15 to 20 knots for your Thursday. For Friday, look for an easterly wind anywhere from 15 to 25 knots, so winds are diminishing here and improving for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast on Friday, and generally an offshore wind working over the Chukchi coast, about 10 to 15 knots as we get into Friday, around the Bering Strait and south of Wales, 15 knots and 3 to 4-foot seas in the open waters there as we go into the weekend. Recapping tonight's weather, once again, low pressure will hover across the western Gulf. It looks like around 997 millibars tonight. For areas around the northern parts of southeast, we're expecting to see a little bit of snow developing there, mainly around Haines and the Haines Highway. Most of that's going to come in tomorrow as we go. Again, it looks like we'll see a little bit of accumulating snow, maybe as much as 4 to 8 inches. High pressure holding up across the northern parts of the Yukon, 1,022 millibars. A trough of low pressure extends out and away south of the Bering Strait, and that makes room for a lot of cold air to sweep from east to west across the rest of the North American continent and the interior of Alaska, but it does look fairly dry for most areas, generally north and west of the Alaska Range. As we get into Friday, low pressure starts to come up, 991 millibars there on Friday. Looks like we'll continue to see an onshore push in really all directions, keeping southeast kind of soggy, Prince William Sound a little bit wet. Areas of rain around Kodiak Island and fairly mild, with a new system coming into the central and western Aleutians and likely bringing up some gales for the central and eastern chain, and some light snow continues out in the west. Have a good night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.